The state paid them as agents to spy on terrorists but allowed them to kill.
He was a very powerful person in West Belfast. I asked him how my son had died, and he told me that the guy who shot him he shot him in the back of the neck, and apparently that shot didn't kill him, and he shouted at him to shoot him again.
The British Secret Services made sure their murderous agents escaped prosecution.
Now, I had all of the terrorist organisations in Northern Ireland operating in North Belfast. What I really didn't need was people like the FRU and Special Branch facilitating the murder of someone.
MI5 and Special Branch don't want their dirty secrets exposed in public, but grieving families demand justice.
Mary was sacrificed for the sake of somebody else, and that's very difficult.
The people that murdered Lorraine were not charged with her murder because the police did not want their own agents or informants going to jail.
After admitting state collusion in the murder of solicitor Pat Finucane, the government reneged on a promise for a public inquiry. Instead, it asked Tory lawyer Sir Desmond de Silva to review top-secret security service files on the Finucane murder.
The collusion demonstrated beyond any doubt by Sir Desmond, which included the involvement of state agencies in murder, is totally unacceptable. Collusion should never, ever happen.
De Silva is one of the most startling pieces of work to come out of the conflict. Its influence has yet to be felt and could be potentially far-reaching.
It makes it very clear that there was systemic collusion here in Northern Ireland for many years, and that that collusion was the result of deliberate policies taken at very high levels.
Tonight, in the aftermath of the De Silva report, Insight investigates the growing scandal of bereaved families who view as betrayal the role of government in the murders of their loved ones, Protestants and Catholics. We'll hear about the state conspiracy that's allowed a cover-up of those crimes, including murder, to protect agents, their handlers and security service bosses from prosecution. We'll reveal a treacherous world where lives were lost, victims of life and death decisions being made by those running the intelligence war. Also tonight, we reveal this top-secret Special Branch intelligence document that provides a shocking insight into how handlers sent informers to their deaths. Secret agents endure loneliness, cut off in a world of deceit, living with a constant sense of fear of discovery and the distrust that accompanies paranoia. This was the dark world Desmond de Silva entered through more than 1 million pages of classified documents prepared by the Army, RUC Special Branch and MI5. A world where since the 80s defeat of the IRA was dictated from the top and filtered down to the frontline battle against terrorism.
There can be no political justification for murder or any other crime.
Crime is crime is crime. It is not political, it is crime.
Crime is a crime, except apparently when it comes to the government's own security services. 3 decades later, British democracy is damaged by a government admission that the state colluded with masked men in the murder of Pat Finucane and others. De Silva's report makes disturbing reading in its revelations about police, army and MI5 knowledge of terrorist actions involving paid agents of the state. Tonight, the criminal world of 2 Special Branch agents and 2 other agents run by Army undercover soldiers in the Force Research Unit FRU with MI5 in overall control. Brian Nelson, British Army Agent 6137, De Silva says he played an active role in UFF murders. Ken Barrett, Special Branch Agent Wesley, he boasted to police that he murdered Pat Finucane. Mark Haddock, Special Branch Agent Roxy, got a pay rise after his first murder and went on to kill many more. Freddie Scappaticci, British Army Agent Steak Knife, head of IRA security and the British Army's most prized asset. MI5, the Army and Special Branch appear to fear any inquiry into their conduct during 30 years of violence because it would expose their complicity in terrorism and murder.
We're more like mates than the father and son, you know. It was a severe shock whenever he was murdered.
Is that you, Wayne? Yep, all the best.
It was around the 12th of June 1993 when Joe Mulhern set off from his West Belfast home, waving goodbye to his dad.
He told me he was going to Wicklow, down to a friend's house, and he got into the car. I gave him a few pounds as usual, he was broke. And I think he had a case of beer as well. He took a case of beer with him and a couple of bags of clothes, and that was it.
This is the first time Frank Mulhern has spoken publicly about his son Joe's murder 20 years ago, but now he wants his killers in court. He recalls how Joe, a 23-year-old taxi driver, was depressed at the time and how he thought it was good for Joe and his best friend to go to Wicklow for a break.
He was away for 10 days and the next time I seen him was in the morgue in Knocknagelvin Hospital.
Joe Mulhern's body was found near the Tyrone border at Castlederg. He'd been interrogated for over a week by the IRA, accused of passing information to Special Branch. 6 weeks later, Frank Mulhern is fixing a car in a West Belfast street, when without warning he's face to face with the IRA's top inquisitor, Freddie Scappaticci. Soon, Frank Mulhern is taken into the dark world of Provo justice.
A car passed me, and then it stopped, reversed up a bit and stopped, and Scap, as he was known, got out. And he came over, shook hands with me, asked me how things were. During the course of the conversation, I asked him how my son had died. And he told me that when he got there, meaning where my son was held, that my son was naked and all he had on him was a cross and a chain, which I still have. And he told the people who were holding him to let him get washed, get shaved, and give him something to wear.
From 1980 on, Freddie Scappaticci ruled the IRA with fear as head of security. In fact, he felt so powerful and protected he could tell the father whose son had just been executed about the kind of interrogation techniques his son had faced. He had shared this kind of intimate knowledge of IRA methods before in 1993, when he was secretly recorded by 2 ITV journalists from the Cook Report.
See where people saying now that they use a lot of violence? They don't really. Physical violence they don't use now. They use mental violence, obviously. You know, they get you into a room, they blindfold you, right? Strip you, they have you sitting there, right? Maybe the room's cold. They make you all sorts of promises, right? And everybody being what they are, everybody's a breaking point. You know? And they think they're going to go home, but they don't.
Frank Mulhern says what he heard next was chilling and convinced him that Scappaticci was involved in his son's murder.
I asked him how my son had died, and he said that he told me the guy had shot him, the first shot hit him in the neck, and he shouted at him to shoot him again, and the second shot hit him in the back of the head. Apparently that was around to kill him.
10 years later, Freddie Scappaticci was exposed as Steak Knife by Sunday People journalist Greg Harkin. A few days later, Scappaticci's solicitor invites only 2 journalists to meet his client and to hear a statement of denial. By this time, English Police Chief Sir John Stevens, who conducted a total of 3 inquiries here, had brought a Loyalist Army agent Brian Nelson to court. But Sir John had heard of the Army's Republican agent Freddie Scappaticci, as a Special Branch contact told Brian Rowan.
He said, you know, that the Stevens team were interested in talking to Scappaticci, he said about killing some of our people. And I thought he meant special branch officers. In fact, what he was talking about was special branch agents. So here you had within that frame a story of someone who was working for the state, interrogating, preparing for execution, others who were working for the state.
More than 40 people were executed by the IRA's internal security unit for doing what Freddie Scappaticci was doing, getting paid by the British for giving up IRA secrets. Scappaticci denied being steak knife. More difficult to deny was his IRA membership. His unit vetted all new recruits and investigated IRA failures and dished out discipline.
I am Freddie Scappaticci. I'm sitting here today with my solicitor. I'm telling you I'm not guilty of any of these allegations.
Like Scappaticci, Sinn Féin and the IRA have maintained a silence, and Scappaticci has not faced charges. But last year a former Army GOC confirmed that Scappaticci was a prized military intelligence asset. Sir John Woolsey made the admission during a telephone call from former Army agent handler Ian Hurst, posing as a TV researcher.
We knew we had this source, steak knife, and it was the golden egg. It was the one thing that was terribly important to the army.
What about the police, sir? Would they have had?
Well, they were trying to get him. They were trying to get him off us. Fred didn't want to go with the police. He thought they were sectarian, and he didn't want to be handled by MI5 or MI6. So we were terribly cagey about Fred, and he was our most valuable asset. I mean, he was probably the military's most valuable asset.
The former head of the British Army in Northern Ireland even revealed that he'd actually met Freddie Scappaticci in a South Belfast car park.
The head of the intelligence in Northern Ireland came to see me and said that Stevens was burrowing around and that Fred Scappaticci, whatever his name is, steak knife, was unsettled. And would I go and see him and reassure him to the value of his work? And that's what I did.
We contacted Sir John Woolsey, but he told us he didn't want to speak to journalists at present. Meanwhile, back in Northern Ireland, Frank Mulhern attended his son's inquest. Evidence confirmed what Scappaticci had told him a year before, that his son was shot twice.
When I went to the morgue to see my son, he was on his back, and the morgue attendant told me he didn't suffer because he was shot in the back of the head. And I took it that it was one shot in the back of the head. What Scap told me was news to me, but I never said anything to anybody. But it must have been a year or so later. At the inquest, it was said at the inquest that he was actually shot twice.
Are you convinced that Freddie Scappaticci was there when your son was being questioned and was there when your son was shot dead?
I am 1,000,000% certain.
You couldn't be mistaken?
No, I don't believe I'm mistaken. The things he told me, the fact that my son had got a shave, the fact that he was shot twice, the fact that he was wearing a cross and chain, I am 1,000,000% certain.
Solicitor Kevin Winters represents Frank Mulhern and over 30 other families seeking accountability from the state on collusion issues.
Far too many people have died in this jurisdiction as a result of collusion, and that has been over 35 years of the conflict. There is a long overdue need to have this issue addressed. Many people have walked free from liability, criminal liability before the courts, in order to protect an intelligence collusion agenda.
Last year, the Historical Inquiries team had Scappaticci arrested and questioned about Joe Mulhern's murder. He was released without charge. A court order prevents the media from reporting Scappaticci's whereabouts or publishing current images of him. Coming up, secrets kept behind closed doors at number 10.
We are being told that we can't find out what happened and why because it might be damaging for MI5. I don't accept that.
The De Silva report casts some light into state collusion in the murder of Pat Finucane. Next, we reveal MI5's unseen but powerful influence at Westminster. A murder scene in North Belfast on the 12th of February 1989. It fitted the already established pattern of death in that part of the city. Yet almost 25 years on, it has acquired international human rights status and has yet to give up all its secrets.
It was a normal Sunday. We were having Sunday dinner, getting ready for school the next day and everything that a house does on a Sunday night. The five of us were sitting having dinner when we heard a crash. My father got up to see what it was, and at that point 2 gunmen entered our kitchen, shot my father 14 times and my mother once, and he died in front of us.
In 1985, Brian Nelson was headhunted by the Army Intelligence Corps, who brought him back from Germany to rejoin the UDA. It was Nelson who targeted Pat Finucane, a Catholic solicitor. The Army provided photographs and security details of Republican suspects to pass on to the UDA. Nelson even scouted the Finucane home with the assistance of his Army handlers, who drove him in an unmarked car to ensure he got through random checkpoints. At least 5 of the UFF gang involved in the murder were Special Branch agents. Pat Finucane didn't stand a chance. Ken Barrett had killed many times for the UFF before he shot Pat Finucane. In 1991, Barrett even bragged to 3 police officers about shooting Finucane 14 times. Experienced CID detective Jonty Brown was shocked by what he heard.
He became boastful and gloating over how he murdered this man, and I was turned around my seat facing, watching him as he put his hands down into the footwell, and he was boom, 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 boom. And he looked up at me, and you could see he was really living it. And he said, "You'd never tired of doing this, Jonty."
Rather than prosecute Barrett for murder, Special Branch recruited him, something that caught the Prime Minister's attention when he read the De Silva report.
What is extraordinary is that back in 1991, instead of prosecuting him for murder, as the RUC CID wanted to, the RUC Special Branch decided instead to recruit him as an agent.
Ken Barrett's luck ran out in 2003. He couldn't stop boasting about how he'd killed Pat Finucane, and eventually he was secretly recorded by police in England. It resulted in a life sentence, but he was set free in 2006. All the other police agents involved in the Finucane murder continued to enjoy protection. But the man running the murder investigation, Superintendent Alan Simpson, resented Special Branch's interference.
I had all of the terrorist organisations in Northern Ireland operating in North Belfast. What I really didn't need was people like the FRU and Special Branch facilitating the murder of someone. I really had enough people, enough people to organise murders within my area without them also getting involved.
But it wasn't just Special Branch agents that were protected from prosecution. It was also FRU agent Brian Nelson, of whom Desmond De Silva wrote,
"I'm satisfied that the net impact of Brian Nelson's activity as an agent of the FRU materially increased the UDA's capacity to target Republicans. Moreover, I believe that Nelson was consistently motivated by a desire to see the UDA murder Republican targets. He only wished to save the lives of those he deemed to be innocent Catholics."
One innocent Catholic Nelson failed to save was Gerard Slane. Nelson set up Slane, a 33-year-old father of 3, for murder, providing the UFF with his address and even a security force photograph of Slane, before going off on a family holiday to Blackpool the day before Slane's murder.
They smashed the front door in. The thuds up them up the stairs. It was like popping from the guns, and you could smell smoke. The kids were squealing. There was a step ladder at the top of the stairs for Jared to get up in the roof space. He used that to try and fight them off, but it was no good. He just shot him dead at the top of the stairs in front of me and our 3 children.
De Silva says the Slane murder is the most serious example of Frew failing to pass on pre-attack intelligence to RUC Special Branch. But he condemns Special Branch for failing to take action against the West Belfast UDA gang involved, many of whom were Special Branch agents who went on to plot and to kill Pat Finucane.
We've made the case to the PPS that there is enough to warrant a fresh criminal investigation with reference to the security force involvement.
All we ever want is justice for Gerard. I just want to know why he was killed, why he was targeted, and who was involved. Well, we know who was involved in his murder, but it goes to the top.
This is UDA leader Jim Spence, referred to as L20 by De Silva. De Silva says the police were informed that Spence directed the murder of Gerard Slane and went on to direct and organise the murder of Pat Finucane. And yet De Silva says the RUC did nothing to stop him. Perhaps the fact that Jim Spence was working as a Special Branch informant had something to do with that. Brian Nelson was the only person to face a charge relating to Gerard Slane's murder. He admitted 5 conspiracy to murder charges in 1992, after at least 4 murder charges were dropped. He got 10 years, served 4, and died in exile in April 2003.
Of course, intelligence saved lives, but that's only part of the story. And we were told these fanciful stories as we covered the conflict here. Brian Nelson was meant to have saved hundreds of lives, and yet when you read the De Silva report recently, I think there are 2 or 3 cases where he actually intervened and lives were saved.
David Cameron told the Finucane family in October 2011 there'd be no public inquiry.
I was so angry with the Prime Minister that I actually called a halt to the meeting and said I couldn't listen to any more of what he was saying.
Jane Winter was there as an observer.
He said, look, the previous administration could not deliver an inquiry, and he was addressing his remarks to Geraldine Finucane, in your husband's case, and neither can we, because there are people all around this place, and he actually made that gesture, who won't let it happen. And I thought, well, that's an honest answer for once.
And what did it tell you?
It told me that he was in hock to the security services, just like every other Prime Minister has been.
That's basically MI5.
Yes.
7 months before that Downing Street meeting with the Finucane family, MI5 were already making their feelings known. They'd written to the government to register their objection to any inquiry that would scrutinise in public their role in Northern Ireland. They said the cost of administration alone would be £3 million, and then there was the question of security.
Leaving aside the cost, the fact that agents are being required to give evidence and the pressure on us to make past agent reporting public will have a damaging effect on the service's current ability to recruit and retain agents. This impact will be felt across the range of our counter-terrorism work, in particular Northern Ireland.
To have MI5 say that there are things that we should just not look at, and therefore we will not have a public inquiry. We're talking about the murder of a solicitor in front of his family, the murder of many other people, innocent people, who were allowed to die, and yet we are being told that we can't find out what happened and why, because it might be damaging for MI5. I don't accept that.
When De Silva looked at Finucane, he concluded that there wasn't some overarching state conspiracy. I think if you give someone else the same pieces of information, and maybe also if you give them the pieces of information that are still being withheld from the Finucane jigsaw, that they might put that picture together to say that there was an overarching state conspiracy.
More and more people are pressing MI5 and Special Branch for the truth.
I think now that perhaps the reason that Mary's murder was never found and the reason they didn't gather that evidence was obviously to protect somebody.
Next, we reveal a top-secret Special Branch intelligence report that shows how handlers sacrificed informers' lives and put police colleagues at risk. We've heard that collusion protects murderers from prosecution. Now we reveal the dark side of agent handling, where informants' lives can be sacrificed to save other informants.
I know that the police had to do certain things in order to protect others, but it just seems so morally wrong. Who makes that decision?
It was Sunday, April the 8th, 1984. Judge Tom Travers was leaving Mass in South Belfast, along with his wife Joan and daughter Mary, when suddenly 2 gunmen ran up and opened fire. Anne Travers was at home just around the corner when the shots were heard.
I ran down and my mum was leaning over my dad saying, my poor husband, somebody please help my poor husband. And Mary was just lying a little bit away from Dad, kind of at his feet. There was like blood coming out from her mouth. And it was just sheer confusion. An ambulance this time had arrived and Mary was in it and my brother Paul was sitting in it. And I climbed in and I heard Paul say to the doctor who was there, had a flask of water, was cleaning up Mary's mouth, I think. And he said, but she's going to be all right, isn't she? And the doctor shook her head.
Joan Travers survived only because the gun put to her head failed to fire. Husband Tom Travers survived 6 IRA bullets. But the death of his daughter Mary, a 23-year-old teacher, left him broken-hearted.
When he came home from hospital, he had lost so much weight and he could barely walk. He was just this fragile, broken man, and he was devastated that Mary was gone, that Mary had been killed. Completely devastated.
Mary McArdle was jailed for having the murder weapons, but the alleged gunman, Joe Hockey, was acquitted. McArdle was subject of recent controversy over her brief role as a Sinn Féin special advisor at Stormont. Tom Travers was distraught when he was told the police didn't take up an opportunity to search the safe house used by the gunmen for clues before the IRA cleaned it up.
An ex-Special Branch officer came to see him and told him that the day after Mary's murder, that an agent that he was a handler for phoned him and told him that he was being sent in to clean up a flat in Malone Avenue. That he was to clean it with Jay's fluid and to remove any guns or any evidence that would be there.
The former Special Branch officer told Tom Travers that his superior had declined this opportunity to gather vital forensic clues that might help prosecute the killers. Years later, the superior officer told the Historical Inquiries team he had no recollection of this officer's request.
The agent that this police officer said that he was the handler for was a man called Fenton.
Joe Fenton.
Joe Fenton, yeah.
5 years later, Joe Fenton was killed by Freddie Scappaticci's nutting squad. Interrogated and shot, his body dumped in an alley at Lenadoon in West Belfast. It was the 26th of February 1989. Next day, an IRA statement said, Joe Fenton was a British agent for 5.5 years and he was handled by a Special Branch officer called McIlveen. He contacted McIlveen and an Englishman called Don at Castlereagh. Joe Fenton's father, Patrick, was later to tell a Belfast court he went to a Sinn Féin office and heard a tape of his son Joe's alleged confession to the IRA.
What we heard on the tape again, the tape that Joseph made, he said that the Special Branch had told him that they could put him away behind bars
for 20 years, maybe more. While he was behind bars, accidents could happen to his family and things like that, and that's really how the pressure, I think, came on.
I remember a special branch officer saying to me, every time we use an agent, we take a bit of their life. And what he meant was every time we use them, the more compromised they become, the more vulnerable they become, the closer they get to being executed.
So it was with Joe Fenton. His intelligence had crippled the IRA in West Belfast. As suspicions grew, a plan was hatched to keep Fenton in business. Insight understands that Joe Fenton's handlers gave him the names of 3 other informants to pass on to the IRA, to deflect suspicion away from Fenton. But it led to the deaths of 3 others, put to death by the IRA's nutting squad under the supervision of British Army agent Freddie Scappaticci.
The couple, Gerald and Catherine Mahon from Twinbrook, were bundled out of the taxi and taken up an alleyway. 28-year-old Mr. Mahon was shot twice in the head. Mrs. Mahon tried to run away, but her hands were tied with crepe bandages. The 27-year-old was shot in the leg and back, and then 4 times in the head.
First, the Mahons died on the 8th of September 1985. Fenton admitted giving up their names in his taped IRA confession. 2 years later, Fenton was given the name of Charles McElmurray. He too was interrogated and shot. His body was found in April 1987 along the border near Newry. Joe Fenton was just another casualty in the duplicitous and treacherous world of spies. This top secret special branch intelligence form is known as an SB-50. We found this one online. It tells a shocking tale of double-dealing handlers who put the lives of their colleagues at risk as they play a deadly game of trying to protect their own particular source. Insight is satisfied that this document is genuine. It reveals that the IRA had seen through police attempts to prolong Fenton's informer status. So the IRA's head of security and top British Army agent Freddie Scappaticci is asked to go back over every job Fenton has been involved in. Was Special Branch agent McElmurray given to Pyra to enhance Fenton's position? And was the whole thing set up by RUC Special Branch? Insight can reveal that the betrayal of Charles McElmurray by Special Branch handlers almost caused the murders of 2 of their colleagues at a meeting with McElmurray. The Special Branch Intelligence SB-50 form states, after McElmurray was given to them, Pyra had intended to shoot McElmurray along with his 2 handlers. However, it was called off because Pyra surveillance saw an RUC traffic car floating around the area while McElmurray was at his meet. The outcome of the IRA's internal investigation was the execution of Joe Fenton. He'd been pushed to the limit. He was the 4th person to die in this sordid episode at the hands of Scappaticci's nutting squad. Castlereagh was Special Branch headquarters when run by Assistant Chief Constable Raymond White.
Out of the 100-odd people that died at the hands of or were murdered at the hands of the paramilitaries as being suspected informers, amongst those there were some people that had actually worked for us. Yes, that's correct. And as I say, that's an issue you carry in your conscience every day. You know, it doesn't leave you.
I'm going to throw 2 names here and ask if you're aware of any concerns that the police special branch might have had about the deaths of Joe Fenton and Charles McElmurray.
I wouldn't be answering on any of those, no. As I say, I don't think it's right and proper that I identify or comment on any particular individual's death as such.
The big card that Special Branch has to play is they could bring the roof down. If you give someone an objective, which is the destruction of the IRA, well then that's what they'll set out to try to do. So you put Special Branch in the dock, Special Branch will put the state in the dock. And I think that's their get out of jail card.
While Anne Travers doesn't believe all policemen are corrupt, to her the undercover war games offer little comfort as she and other families find out how secret agents literally got away with murder.
We all wanted justice for Mary. But Dad lived and breathed this for the rest of his life, up until really until his dying day, until a few weeks before he actually died, before he was too ill to do anything more about it. I know that Dad felt that maybe Mary was sacrificed for the sake of somebody else. And that's very difficult. It's cruel. Very, very cruel.
In part 4, a brutal killer of a young Protestant woman is recruited, not prosecuted.
There wasn't a part of her body that wasn't marked. They'd beaten her that badly. They killed knowing that they were never going to be brought to court for it.
Spying is a dangerous pastime in the world of agents and handlers. Death is never far away, but justice for victims is often beyond reach.
I think high-ranking officers within the Special Branch played games with people's lives.
A Loyalist drinking den in North Belfast's Tynedale area. It was the early hours of March the 8th, 1987. Something evil was about to happen to one of the drinkers, Lorraine McCausland, a young mother of 2.
Lorraine had been at a local community centre which was run by local UDA members. It was a club that stayed open all night or until people left. Lorraine was last seen around 6 o'clock in the morning.
Cathy McIlvenny is speaking out for the first time about her sister's murder.
They'd battered Lorraine so badly, she was unrecognisable. We couldn't have the coffin opened. My mother never got to see her again. Her liver had been busted, her eyes had been busted. There wasn't a part of her body that wasn't marked. They'd beaten her that badly. But she had put a fight up for her life.
The semi-naked body of 23-year-old Lorraine McCausland was found lying face down in this stream earlier yesterday by a woman out walking her dog. The dead woman was dressed only in a black top, and a concrete block which was covering her head was later taken away for forensic examination by police.
3 men and 3 women in the centre at the time of the murder were arrested, questioned and released.
We came from the unionist community. In 1987, well, we were brought up to believe in law and order and believed that the police would bring our murderers to court. Unfortunately, our views have changed. The investigation was a shambles.
A year passes, and in 1988 an unlikely witness emerges as part of a routine police inquiry. During questioning, a young burglar says he witnessed Lorraine McCausland's murder.
His eyewitness statement described in detail the main suspect lifting the gas bottle above his head, breaking the fluorescent light in the ceiling, and it being brought down on Lorraine's face.
But there was worse to come. The eyewitness went on to describe how the killer dragged Lorraine outside to finish her off with breeze blocks.
They dumped her body in the river, and in the coroner's report they couldn't say for sure whether she had died before they dumped the body or whether she was still alive, but the breeze block being dropped on her head was the thing that killed her.
The eyewitness identified the killer as a local UDA leader. He also named the 5 others present at the time of the murder. That's the 6 people questioned and released a year before.
We believe as a family that the people that murdered Lorraine were not charged with her murder because the police did not want their own agents or informants going to jail.
In 2009, HET investigators described the witness to Lorraine McCausland's murder as unreliable. They'd tracked him down, but he denied being in the drinking club. He said the statement he'd signed was one presented by the police, and he signed it under duress. The police officer who took the statement said he passed it on to his boss, a detective chief inspector, who refused to cooperate with HET, but who'd earlier told the police ombudsman that he had no recollection of the statement. And although the HET could not confirm collusion, Cathy McIlvenny says they did share some interesting information with the family.
What they did tell us was that in 1987 at Lorraine's murder, the main suspect was not a police informant. In April 87, he was.
A month later?
A month later.
Cathy McIlvenny says the family has decided to pursue the killer through a private prosecution. And 26 years later, she still wonders about the role of the three women in the drinking den at the time of her sister's murder.
One of the biggest shocks for me to find out that women were involved as well. You know, they probably have grandchildren of their own now, you know, and as a woman and a mother, I find that just so unbelievable that any woman could take part in a brutal murder like that.
Meet Mark Haddock, who up until 1987 was a criminal passing on low-grade information on criminals until he joined the UVF. He became Special Branch Agent Roxy. His career as a serial killer blossomed. He continued to receive taxpayers' money as his murder spree went on and on.
The 22-year-old former RAF man, whose body was found at Ballyduff Quarry at Newton Abbey yesterday morning, had been battered almost beyond recognition.
When my son was murdered, if somebody had said to me Mark Haddock was an informer, I'd laughed at them. I believed it was Republican propaganda. I learned the hard way, along with so many other families, that it wasn't Republican propaganda, it was the truth.
Raymond McCord says his son's life and at least 10 others would have been saved if Haddock had been put behind bars after his first murder on January the 17th, 1993. That's when Haddock shot 27-year-old Catholic Sharon McKenna at her home in North Belfast. Her brother Paul McKenna remembers hearing about a murder on the radio just before police arrived at the family home.
I answered the door and it was the female officer that asked to speak to my parents. I just knew straight away what was happening. And my mum, she was coming down the stairs at the time and she must have had the same feeling herself. She just said to the police officers, "It's Sharon, isn't it?" And the police officer says, "Yes, I'm afraid it is." So that was the day my life was turned upside down.
Next day, Mark Haddock requested a meeting with 2 CID officers.
The confession that came from Mark Haddock, you've got to bear in mind that this is not the big man that you see on television today. This is a little slip of a guy. This is just he's in the mini metro, you know, and he's not too big for it. He was very forthcoming. He was crying. He was remorseful, very, very remorseful, and he wanted to go to jail for the murder. And I said, well, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. We'll get you to jail. But in the meantime, I need to know who else was involved.
As with Ken Barrett, who shot Pat Finucane, Haddock was not prosecuted. Special Branch made sure of that. In fact, they gave Haddock a pay rise, and he went on to be involved in at least 9 other murders, and maybe as many as 14.
I think the state knew that agents were involved in killing, and yet I said at the time of the Haddock report that it's far too early to be shocked, because there is more and worse to come.
I certainly wouldn't have been contemplating Haddock's involvement in what you would call licensing him in any shape or form to participate in what you're implying, and that's in further murders of any shape or form. And I still can't conceive that Special Branch would have done that. We didn't play with people's lives, and as I say, we certainly didn't play with our own members' lives or the lives of soldiers. And regretfully, we couldn't save all the lives that were there and lost during the Troubles. What we did, what we saw, was our possible best. So I think there's an excellent story to be told, certainly in relation to those members of the public who put their trust in police officers to work with us to prevent the loss of life and the destruction of property. I don't think this country could ever acknowledge, as I say, the contribution that those that acted as agents did on our behalf.
Lawyer Jane Winter is convinced that Desmond de Silva's report proves collusion was a state policy.
He makes it so clear that people were not acting as individuals or rotten apples in the barrel, but were operating policies which came from on high.
I don't think it's Republicans and Loyalists who fear the digging up of the past and all of that being shoveled to the surface. I think it's others in those worlds of MI5 and Special Branch who probably have much more to fear.
As more and more examples of collusion emerge from both communities here, people are asking why those tasked with upholding the law were actually covering up their own crimes. And for bereaved families, the big question remains: why has no one been made accountable?
Nobody's lost anybody that way or any way during the Troubles can ever get over it. You know, the law will be there.
I would like to see Freddie, Scavatici, Stick Knife, whatever you choose to call him, and his handlers taken to an open court, and let the court decide.
I think policemen should stand charged with accessory to murder. And not policemen on the beat. The guys that were high up and took these decisions to let these guys away with murder should be charged with accessory to murder. Because in my eyes, they covered Lorraine's murder up, so that's an accessory.
I know their arguments. They say some people had to be allowed to die, maybe to save 50 others from dying. That's wrong, because none of us are God. Only God can decide who's going to live and die. Dad's not alive anymore to find justice for his daughter, but if I can do it, I will do it.